Melanie Onn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and it's an absolute pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady from Bristol West. I wanted to participate in this afternoon's debate principally to talk about some of the very shockingly violent crimes that my area has experienced in recent months, and I wanted to explore a bit more broadly the situation in Great Grimsby and North East Lincolnshire to try and get to the bottom of what seems to be causing a spike in that serious violent crime. In Humberside, we've seen an increase in violent and sexual crime of 20%. And to go to some of the arguments that have been made about how police numbers are not the only story, but there is an issue about referrals as well. At the same time that sexual crime seems to be going up, referrals to the CPS across the country are going down. But I do really want to focus on violence and drugs. And I've previously mentioned in the House the gang of hooligans that went marauding across a lovely seaside town, frightening the life out of many of my constituents. The poor man who was killed by a single punch. Another man, Anthony Richardson, who was homeless but was killed in a daylight attack. Bins that have been set on fire against vulnerable people's homes, resulting in them dying. A knife this week pulled on a child at a BMX track by another child. These are certainly not of the regularity and seriousness that some members have discussed this afternoon, but they are serious and they do have a lasting impact on my community. The incidents, they're separate. There is time between them, so I certainly don't want to paint my town as being one that is riddled with violent crime, but it certainly is becoming an issue. And in a small town and in a small borough like North East Lincolnshire, it has a lasting impact on the impression that people can have of the area. And the Honourable Member for Erdington made the point about people's sense of fear and that perception of crime, and that is an incredibly important issue to many of my constituents. In March this year, there were 626 recorded violent crimes. It has never been this high, and I've looked back to all the way back to 2011 figures. Now, it doesn't distinguish between domestic violence crime and other violent crime, but actually I don't think that matters a great deal. And I feel that this violent crime is linked to drugs. I know that the government's strategy refers to crack cocaine being an issue, but the biggest issue on the streets of North East Lincolnshire seems to be spice, with the effects being so varied and users really not knowing where they are or what they're doing. And the local outreach service, Harbour Place, noting that this is the most destructive drug that they've seen on the streets of Great Grimsby. And it's interesting, the drug crimes don't seem to have risen in the same way that the violent crime has, and I was wondering whether there was an issue with the drugs not being tackled at an early enough stage, resulting in the increase in serious violence, and if there were more action taken to deal with the drugs element, that perhaps we would not see the violent crime happening in the way that it is. And I don't know whether these are reported issues of drug use and incidents or charges, and perhaps it hides some of the detail, but it does leave me quite concerned that violent drug criminals are not being apprehended, despite the determination of Humberside Police through Operation Impact, where they have tried to deal with this, because Grimsby is a known town at the receiving end of the county lines action that is taking place at the moment. That involvement by the police at the moment does seem to solely have been around engaging in that county lines operation to try and stem the flow of drugs, and it has been mentioned by other colleagues this afternoon about trying to stop the big dealers from allowing the proliferation of drugs to spread around the country by those gangs, orchestrating things to smaller local areas. And one of the things that constituents have said to me, that is all well and good, looking at the big picture, stopping the big fish in their tracks, but the impact that it has at a very local level means that the police do not have the resources to be able to intervene on a very street level of drug taking and the impact that that has on neighbourhoods. So there was a comment made about people injecting heroin in a stairwell. They're lucky that they've got the privacy of a stairwell in Bristol West, because I've witnessed it openly in the middle of the street in my constituency. And it puts people in fear. Yeah. It really does. It makes them feel like the police are not intervening to stop that action happening. It makes them feel that there is nobody who has the power or the responsibilities to try and stop those things that are happening right in front of our noses. And if I am seeing it and the constituents are seeing it, they do wonder why nobody in authority is seeing it and stepping in to stop it happening. And it's not just the difficult estates. It's not just the areas that have greater social deprivation. Recently, I've had reports of drugs being dealt from very nice middle-class homes in quiet areas where the police have had little cause to go, usually. And the criminals consider those to be blind spots of the police. And the attention of tackling that source of the drugs, I've already mentioned, that has had a real impact on the local community, and people really feeling very frightened in their neighbourhoods. We know that there are, in Humberside, 800 fewer police and police staff now than in 2010. And I would just like to say that there has been some excellent work by Labour's Police and Crime Commissioner, who has recognised some of these issues, and the Chief Constable also, who has heard my concerns about the fact that it has to be a dual strategy. Yes, tackling it at the bigger level of the criminal gangs, but also dealing with the impact in people's streets and people's homes. And the Police and Crime Commissioner for Humberside, Keith Hunter, has recognised those issues, and rather than sitting on millions of pounds in reserves as his predecessor did, he's decided to plough it back into shoring up staffing numbers, including the recent recruitment of 200 new officers. And I do applaud him for that, but we have to remember that reserves can only be spent once, and we need to make sure that there is sustainability in that programme. And I ask the Minister to take the opportunity to have a look at that sustainability. And I do think that I should take a moment just to thank Humberside Police, because I do think that there is a genuine determination in wanting to tackle the root cause of the extreme violence linked to drugs, and have at every request that I've put to them been part of community solutions, giving up their resources to help, and not always just in direct terms of dealing with crime, but also recently a PCSO in the Freshney ward found an elderly gentleman who had been hit by his own garage door and left unconscious on the floor. I don't know how long he'd been there, but the fact that we have PCSOs who are grounded in the community, who are walking the beat, were able to see that man, were able to help him and get him to hospital and get him the help that he needs, I think goes to show the very broad importance of neighbourhood policing and those boots on the ground, giving confidence to local communities that their police are aware of the issues, however innocent and minor they might be, right up to being aware of more serious incidents that are happening in the community. But the police are having to tackle ever more inventive crime gangs that are operating through young people, and not the young people that I expected. In a meeting that I had with the police last week, where I was talking about vulnerable children being exploited, thinking of children who were looked after, disadvantaged or marginalised, and they said, well, actually, no, those are not the children who are being targeted now. It is the well-dressed, respectable-looking young people who are being targeted by some of these gangs, because they are completely unassuming, and the police would never think to stop them, would never think that those children might be the ones who are involved in any kind of criminal activity. So the police do need the opportunity to provide that resource into the intelligence-led work that other colleagues have talked about. And I just wanted to finish really on the point that I think that, activity with young people, access to youth clubs, youth activity are so important. And in North East Lincolnshire, we've had all but one youth club shut in the last 8 years. And that youth club is the Shalom Centre. It's been run by Canon John Ellis. They have been at threat of closure. They've had to go to crowdfunding to try and source an essential £40,000 to stay open. This is in one of the most deprived wards. They've managed to raise £15,000 so far, which is absolutely fantastic, and I congratulate him and commend him on his efforts. And we're also seeing another community group taking on the Grimsby Boxing Academy, led by Andy Cox, are reopening the Trin Youth Club in Cleethorpes as well, thanks to North East Lincolnshire allowing them to take that property on a peppercorn rent. And I just want to mention as well the Cat Zero and CPO Full Families programme that I know the Minister is aware of, in terms of staying in touch with those families who do need assistance and help and support more broadly. There is clearly a picture across the country that differs, but all of those communities are experiencing difficulties and fear and hurt and concern. And the Minister has to be absolutely sure that her strategy is the right one for tackling that whole variety of different issues.